I know everybody's probably missing that hour last night. I am. Didn't feel right. If you ever traveled and had jet lag, it's kind of what it feels like this morning to me anyway. We tried to go to, we said we were going to go to bed early, but it's hard to go to bed at 9:30. And because it's really 10:30, we looked at the clock and said, well, we need to go to bed now because it's 9:30. It's really 10:30. Didn't do it. It was 10:30, which is 11:30 before we finally went to bed. That's still earlier than we usually do. So anyway, we did a draggy this morning. So anyway, glad you're here. Glad you're here. This morning's chapter is called What's Really Best for the Kids? And so we're moving in this chapter from marriage to another part of marriage, which is parenting. And I thought this chapter was really challenging. Asked some questions that were really thought-provoking and challenging for me as a dad. Dane and I talked about it on the way here this morning. There were a couple of things that he said that kind of irritated her and did me too. But still, nonetheless, some things to think about. And our kids, our son is 30, and which is really strange to say out loud, that you have a son that turned 30, especially when you feel 32, 33 yourself, you know. But anyway, 30, kind of strange. Anyway, he turned 30 this year in December, and our daughter is 27, and we are still parenting. And you think at some point, but I don't think it'll ever change. I think we'll be parenting, and that's part of what we talked about this morning on the way here. Realizing that you're never finished, and that God is still doing things through you with your children, and will be, probably until He comes back, or until we die. Or until we kill them. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Anyway, so first question that I like to think about a lot as far as my job as a dad. What is your job as parents? If you boil it down, condense it down, what, as a mom or as a dad, what's your job? What is your responsibility? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to do?
Primarily not screw it up.
Don't mess it up. How you doing with that?
It's so.
Some days okay, some days not so good. Yeah. What is your job? What is your job as a mom? What is your job as a dad?
I think getting them ready to be able to take care of themselves. It's not your job to protect them from everything. It's your job to teach them how to take care of themselves.
Yeah, that's what I've always kind of thought of as my job as a dad. My job as a dad is to make it where the kids don't need me.
Right.
To make it where they don't depend on me anymore. That they can take care of themselves. And there's a lot of different facets of that. And so, as I was going through these, I thought about different things, different aspects of our parenting, and different people that I've talked to in this room. But Cindy Mosier is not here, but the first one I thought of was healthy decisions. Cindy Mosier constantly says, eat your greens. Eat your greens. Eat your vegetables. Make healthy decisions. Dress themselves. You know, if my son is 30 years old and I'm still laying out his clothes for him to wear that day, there's a problem. And so, you know, take care of themselves. Dress themselves. I had a funny story there, but my wife mixed it, so I'll leave it alone.
Well, she still put your clothes on?
No. Thank you, brother. Yeah. Teach them how to learn, how to study. College is different. When kids get to the point, and that's one of the rude awakenings for college and then for life beyond college. You know, before you get to college, teachers are really good about helping you to get, you know, how to take this. Here's a study sheet, do this chapter. College, they don't do that. College is, here's the book, come to lecture, you're on your own. And some kids, that's a real big awakening, real quick. But he didn't tell me this was going to be on the test. No, son, you're in college. This is different. And that goes, and that's one of the aspects of college that I think is important, is beyond the classroom, is how to grow up. How to learn, how to study, how to get ready for life. And that's part of a job as a parent, teaching them how to find the answers to things.
How to fish.
How to fish. That's right.
Not just eat fish.
How to fish. That's right. How to be yourself. On our refrigerator is a card that Audrey, our daughter, sent to us. And it's got a picture of a bunch of little stick figures jumping off a bridge. And there's another little stick figure that she added long hair to for her being a daughter. And she said, "This is all my friends jumping off a bridge. This is me not doing it." How to be yourself. Just because everybody jumps off a bridge don't mean you have to, you know, that thing that you say. But our job as a parent is to teach your kids how to be yourself. Don't do everything just because everybody else does it. Waking up on time. My daughter is pretty slow to get up. She's better now because she has to. She teaches school. She has to be there early, so she gets up on her own. But one of her things when she was little, and she wouldn't wake up, the way I'd wake her up is I'd bounce her. And I'd go in the room. She's laying there asleep, and but first couple times it's real nice, you know, Audrey, get up. And then I start pushing her on the bed, bouncing her on the bed. And so when she comes home now, and she doesn't get up, I just for old time's sake, not go and bounce her. She just thinks, she loves it. No, she doesn't. How to make decisions with your money. To parents, it's really important to teach kids that. How to make decisions with your money. Give them an allowance, whatever, and say, now you can buy this, but the money's gone if you do. Part of your job as a parent. Work ethic. How important it is to work. And I didn't think of this when I was doing this, but Matt did some work at our house and brought his boy with him. And, you know, his boy was carrying sheetrock out and putting it in the truck. Important. How to work and how important it is to work. One of your jobs as a parent. So, but raising kids is hard work. Y'all all know that. And you can do the best you can do and things still not be just right. By the what's in your mind is what you had pictured for it to be. And there's no fault in that. When they get to be on their own, a lot of times it's their decisions. And you know, your job is to teach them the right decisions, but they're still going to make their decisions. And you know, and sometimes when you read chapters like this, there's a lot of, sometimes you can get some guilt stuff going on. And we need to avoid that. We need to get away from that. But we do still need to talk about how to teach and how to guide and where the right things to go with it all is and all that. This lesson I thought had some really hard questions, some really thought-provoking questions, some really insightful questions. And I told Dana on the way here, there was two in particular that really got to me as I was reading this lesson. And I thought, first I was going to save them to the end, and then I thought, well, if I do that, I might not get to them. So I want to ask one of them at the very first. And it's the question that I really thought a lot about the last couple of weeks as I was preparing this lesson. And I don't know that there's really an answer for it that we need to talk about in here. If we want to, we will. But the question was, it's in the chapter, what would hurt me more? If my kids don't love me, or if my kids don't love God? What would hurt me more? Now, I don't think those two, I don't think there's a very good chance that those questions will be exclusive of each other. In other words, if your kids love God, I think they're going to love you because as you grow as parents and all that. But if you make it that way, if you draw it up that way, what's more important to you? Basically, the way of saying that, what's more important to you? Do your kids love God, or do they love you? Any comments on that?
I think if they see, for the most part, a good example in their family, in their extended family, in their friends, they will love God. But I have some good friends whose children did not turn out the way that they had hoped. They were rebellious. One of them went on and went to school, and eventually, after he got out of rehab, you know, and is doing well now. The other one became a dentist as a child out of wedlock, and as I understand it, he's married another woman now and lives out of town. And that's just one example. There's several others. We have a friend who dated a guy that was, I hate to say anyone was worthless, because everybody has worth in the eyes of God, but this guy was not good for her nor for anyone else. He kidnapped her and her father and strapped dynamite to them and threatened to blow the house up, and the FBI SWAT team had to get him out. She has his child. He's still in prison. He got 25 years to life. You know, so her parents, though, were good. They were good Christians. They ruled with that iron fist. You do it or else. And there is a balance that you have to strike between being too lenient and yet give them enough room to grow and make mistakes and learn. They're not going to learn from your mistakes. It's not going to happen. But I think done well, if they see you doing what is right, it's just like a marriage, you know. Big secret, there's no big secret to making a marriage work. Always try to give more. Don't be a taker. Give more to your spouse than you take in return. And it'll come back to you in spades. I mean, it's just the way it is. So it would break my heart if my kids didn't love God, because that would mean I had totally failed, I think, in teaching in that particular area. Now, they may do everything else well. I couldn't get on my kids about studying in college because I never studied. You know, but I did okay. And there's a delicate balance between being an authoritarian and being an authority or authoritative figure. Difficult sometimes to strike that balance.
I would say that, I mean, obviously we want kids, but I do think that parents can do everything possible that they can do, and it's still possible that a child doesn't know God.
Absolutely, that's what I was saying.
So I
These
don't-
people did what they could, but.
Well, I know, but you said that in your opinion, you felt like you would have failed. That may have been a personal decision, but it's
Yeah.
not a statement of truth.
No, it's a personal decision.
Right. So, because I've seen it.
Oh, we have too. Those are just three examples of people that we've gone to church with for, some of them for years before we came here.
Part of the problem is with what's going on, this discussion about loving God. I think when we personally think the term loving God, we expect them to take on the faith that we have. And you really want them to take on their own faith. But their own faith isn't always in line with what your faith is. Do they love God? I hope so. So,
Yeah. That's a fantastic point and a really good discussion. Where do you go with that? Save that. Let's think about that some more. The book breaks down. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say in relation to what you said, I know Paul says this sometimes from the pulpit, but if we look at it like that, and the reason he says this is because I take everything personally with our kids. If they do something wrong, I'm like, oh, I failed. You know, but God was the perfect parent for us, and we still fail, so, you know, that kind of makes you feel better when your
Yeah.
kids don't do exactly like you want them to.
Part of the reason why I said that, what I said at the very beginning about we're not ever finished, is we don't know what's going to happen. You know, you look at, we have often looked at our kids and think, oh, this is not the way I wish that they would. They're not done.
Right.
And God's not finished. And He's not finished doing His work on them, and He's not finished using us to do our work, to do what He's planned for us to do.
And it's really hard for us as parents to realize that our kids didn't have the same experiences we had. So they're not going to end up like us. I mean, their experiences are totally different from our experiences, no matter how we try to create what we think is the right environment. I mean, their experiences are totally, totally different. They're growing up in a different world. So you have to take that into account when you're looking back.
Yeah.
But one other thing I wanted to say is, I think I've mentioned this before in the ladies class, but right after Paul and I got married, I was in a ladies class where Wendell and Barbara Key, some of you may know them, they were missionaries for a long time. I think in Africa, but anyway, she taught our ladies class, and she was just talking about raising kids and how much easier it was in her eyes to raise kids somewhere else than in the States, to try to keep them from being so worldly. And she made the comment that she felt like you needed to brainwash your kids with the Lord. And, you know, at first that sounds a little abrasive, but she said, you're going to brainwash your kids in something. Your kids will be engulfed with something. Let it be God. Because it's true. I mean, are they going to be raised by the TV? Are they going to be, you know, is it going to be ball? Is it going to be friends? What is it that's going to completely, you know, be a part of every part of their life? And I always thought about that because it goes along with the scripture, teach them when you get up and when you sit down and when they go to bed.
That's good. That's a good kind of segue. Well, let me ask you a question. I'm not a psychologist. Don't want to be, don't pretend to be, but I know they use these tests where you answer things quickly. I think there's a word association test. You say a word, what do you first thing that comes to your mind? There's these ink blot tests that show you an ink blot. What do you first? So, quick question, quick answer. Who do you love more, God or your kids?
Well, that's a no-brainer.
What is
God.
it? God.
Paul and I talked about this right after we got married. God's first, you know. She's second, and my kids are down the line, and my extended family, and I come at the end.
Okay.
And she feels the same way.
Yeah, I agree. That's our quick answer. That's my quick answer. I think that's, you know, a quick answer to that question. That's what we're always going to say most times. I know we talked about this on the way here and had a little conversation about this too. But so the follow-up question to that is, if that's your answer, have you told your kids that?
Yes.
Have you told your kids that God's first, you're second or third? And you know, Dana and I were talking about this on the way here. Dana loves me. I mean, loves God more than she loves me. I know that. She's told me that. And I appreciate that. I love God more than I love Dana. I've told her that. She knows that. She appreciates that. Have I told my kids that? Aaron, I love you more than anything except God. I love you abundantly, but God's first. And so the follow-up question to that is, if you have told them that, and if you are going to tell them that, and if you did tell them that, would they believe you? Would they believe you? And by that I mean, kids are not stupid. They see where the time goes, where the resources goes, where the worship is. Do we worship our kids sometimes? And I hope that phraseology is not offensive, but sometimes we do. And they see that. They know that. They know that they are first. And they rule the roost. And they are number one. And everything goes to them. And now, I would say an exemption to that whole discussion is babies. Babies require everything. And so that's an exemption. He gives an example. This is an example of what I'm talking about in the chapter. He gives an example of Francis Chan, I think, gives an example of taking, he often goes and preaches other places and does mission work in other places. And when he does that, of course, he has to spend time away from his children. And he has in the past and has had people make him feel guilty about that. But he came to the conclusion in the chapter that that's not a bad thing. That showed his kids that God was more important. God was the most important. What do you think about that? Does that discussion irritate you? I think it probably tends to irritate moms more than dads. But what do you think about it? Is that a valid discussion?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you should always make sure that your children's needs are taken care of, but as they get older, those needs change. And sometimes that need is not necessarily, Mom, I need you to wash this shirt. It's, I need you to teach me, kind of like you said, teach them to fish. Teach them how to do their own laundry. Teach them how to, get up in the morning and get themselves a bowl of cereal. Teach them, begin at an early age, teach them how to take care of themselves, because as an infant, they can't feed, clothe, do anything for themselves. And as, I worked a lot of years with families before I had kids. That gave me a pretty big advantage in seeing, maybe not necessarily everything to do, but a lot of things not to do, not to have your kids learn that helplessness. And part of learned helplessness is don't just give them this faith. Don't say, we're going to church, you have to go to church, you're going to be there. Make them work for it. Make them understand why you love God so much, and really how they can learn to have that relationship with God. So give them what they need, but not necessarily everything they want.
What
Well,
else?
I guess I'll be the first one to admit I'm dysfunctional. Because I think I kind of fall into what you're talking about. You just get caught up from the time your kids are in elementary school, and you do this and you do that, and you take them here and you take them there. And of course, at some point you have to draw the line of what they can actually participate in. If you have more than one child, you just get in on a merry-go-round, but it's hard when they leave the house, when you have an empty nest. It is not easy.
I don't agree with that.
I think it's,
I know what
I
you
told I was
mean.
dysfunctional.
Well, we taught our kids no, and they learned what no meant.
Yes, we do.
Well, we did too. I'm not saying that ours got everything they wanted. I'm just saying that I, as a mother, probably got caught up in things a lot easier than Alan did.
I don't know.
And he was, with his job, he had to be gone a lot, and it was just us, and we didn't live close to any family members. And so, I guess that's an excuse, but that's just the way things kind of happen.
Can you do what Jan is saying and still your kids understand that they are not the center of it? I think you can. I think you do what you have to do. You do what you need to do, but you reinforce all the time. God is number one. One way is say, I'm doing this for you because God is first place in my life. And my role as a mom and to serve God as a mom is to take care of you. But I'm doing this because I love God. That's one reason I'm doing what
I
I'm doing.
totally agree with that.
Yeah. I don't think the two are, I don't mean to communicate, and I don't think the book means to communicate, although it can sound that way, is that this is one box and this is another box. And if you're taking care of your kids, then you're not loving God the way you're supposed to. I don't
Well,
think
you
that.
can always look back and see where I wish I had done this a little differently,
Yeah.
and so I admit that there were times that I should have done things differently.
Yeah. Me too.
If you don't look back and say you could have done something differently, I don't think that you're quite normal.
Yeah, going back to what you asked about the statement that Francis made, to me, he was, the way you stated it at least, he was giving himself an out, that because his vocation is tied to his faith. Whereas, I don't know, like he could have found things if he's truly trying to, he could be godly and still made allowances, not have to go do that meeting over here or go to that mission trip or whatever.
Yeah.
And still serve God.
So it could be some rationalization there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like,
Yeah.
essentially, I heard you state it.
Yeah, yeah, it was an interesting point, think about it, but you're right. I think you're right, so,
I think there's so many different ways to raise kids, and it's not that any one way is the right way. I think sometimes we tend to think we know, especially when we're young, that, you know, that this is the best way, but
and a lot of that is determined by the kid, isn't it?
yeah. I mean,
Because you can have two, we had two, and they're completely different.
an environment and so many other things play into it. I mean, it's just do the best you can where you are and ask God's, pray and pray and pray for God to bless your feeble efforts.
Speaking as someone in the weeds, as they say, you know, I have to constantly remind myself that my job is not to raise good kids, but to raise responsible Christian adults. Because sometimes making decisions about how to deal with them, you have to make that decision. And my reason I'm trying to raise good kids, because you can raise good kids and then not be good Christian responsible adults with them. So I try to keep that in mind.
That's a good way to
When I
put
go to the
it.
grocery store with them.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, and that kind of goes to what's kind of next is, and Jason alluded to it, and I think you are too, is teach your children who God is, who Jesus is, not just thou shalt and thou shalt not. Don't teach them just the do's and don'ts. That's important. But teach them who God is. Describe God to them. Model Jesus for them. Explain words like glory and reverence and joy and holy and grace. Turn to Exodus chapter 19. Exodus chapter 19. Part of the discussion about God in your family and with your children, I think, should include a verse something like this. Exodus chapter 19, starting in verse 16. On the third morning of the third day there was thunder and lightning and a thick cloud over the mountains and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God. And they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like the smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled violently, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Then Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. Then turn to Exodus chapter 24. Verse 15. When Moses went up on the mountain, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain, and the seventh day the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. Then Moses entered the cloud as he went up on the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. You know, a description of who God is and what God is like. Not just, you know, now don't, whatever put in there. Don't do this, do this. Dana really pushed me when our kids were young to do Bible stories with them. I was reluctant to do that. I don't really know why. Part of it was I think it felt kind of staged. It didn't feel spontaneous. It didn't feel natural. You know, okay. And most of the time when we went to bed, I would do Bible stories with them, and mostly it was because Dana really said you need to go do that. And so, you know, out of guilt or obedience or whatever, I did that. But it was unnatural for me. It felt staged, and part of it was maybe I thought they weren't going to be very interested, and sometimes it was staged. And sometimes they weren't very interested. But I'm really glad I did it, and I'm glad she encouraged me to do that. And even better yet than doing that, and I think that's critical, I think that's important, but it's everyday stuff. somebody mentioned, I think Dana mentioned, turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And I think, and I'm really thankful for Dana as a mom. She was excellent at this, what Deuteronomy chapter 6 says. But in chapter 6 it says, Deuteronomy chapter, these are the commands, decrees, and laws of the Lord your God directed me to teach you and to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as they live, by keeping all His decrees and commandments that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in the land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. Verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commands that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Verse 7, impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on your doorframes of your houses and on your gates. Every day, when you're pushing that cart at Kroger's, when you're driving down the road, when you're eating your Cheerios, mention God, bring God up, talk about God. One of my favorite stories about that is I was driving down the road one day, I think I was taking him to school, and Aaron was beside me in the car, and I was trying to teach everyday stuff, and so I said, okay, now right here I'm fixing to turn right. And if I don't turn right, if it's not right, then it's what? And he went, wrong. I went, oh, me. But that was a better answer than left. And I thought, yes, good. But anyway, constant exposure to what God is and who God is and what God means to you in your life. And I think that's Deuteronomy 6 is a beautiful verse. And I think it's a beautiful model in parenting. And explaining who God is. And constant prayer. Your children need to see a constant prayer life. And so that goes to the next point is prayer. He makes this point. So what you think about this. Some of this is just what he says. I love the chapter, and I think it's powerful, but sometimes he says prayer is not casual, is the way he words it in the chapter. And by that he means that when you're talking to God, you impress upon your children that this is important, that we are talking to God, and that it is not a casual thing. I know, as I've told y'all, I think some before, John knows, I've been going to Panama, and for this year is my 30th year, which is really pretty amazing too. Anyway. But there's a man in Panama, and we call him Sarge, and he's a giant, even by our standards. But in Panama, the average man is short, and he's 6'3" or 4", big guy. But one day he was getting dressed, getting up in the morning. He was taking a shower, he was shaving, he was putting on the best clothes, that he had for that day. And Dr. Bob Smith, my mentor in a lot of things, was talking with him, and he said, Sarge, what are you doing? And he said, I'm getting dressed because I'm going to pray to God. And Dr. Bob said, well, you don't do all that to pray? And he said, yes, brother. You can't talk to God in your underwear. That's the way he felt about it. Now, I think you can talk to God in your underwear, but Sarge didn't. Sarge didn't believe that. He believed that when I'm talking to God, it's not a casual thing. I disagree with his theology, but I understand the point. So we need to teach our children, according to Francis, and I think there's a little bit to this, that prayer is an important thing, that you're talking to God. That prayer is not something you just do. It's not something that's just rote. We eat a meal, we bow our heads, we say a prayer, get that over with so we can eat. No, it's important. Every time we go somewhere in the car, before we get out of the driveway, most of the time we stop and say a prayer. That's important. It's not just something we do. Teach your kids that. What do you think?
I'd rather them pray anytime they want to, any situation they want to. I believe it's important, but I believe more importantly is talking to God. If you have a moment where there's a problem, you stop and talk to God.
Can you do that and still not be, in your mind, casual?
Sure.
Yes.
You can have a suit and tie on and still be in your underwear, you know.
Yeah, you can be, yeah, I understand, good point.
Well, it just needs to be intentional.
Yeah.
Because in those, I think, at least for myself, I do a lot better in the difficult times of running down the road and it's been a bad day or a bad week and it's, you know, talking to God and saying, I need some help with this. I need you to step in. However, it's a whole lot harder for me when things have been going really well. I see a lot of the nation of Israel when I look at myself. When things are going really well, I don't necessarily pray the way that I should. And that's one thing that I hope I can teach the boys is stop and thank God when something good happens. Thank Him for putting you in that position that you had the opportunity to experience that. You know, so be intentional about it. I don't know that necessarily has to be a formal thing, but intentional of, you know that this happened because God allowed it to happen or God placed this in your life.
I think that's, thank you. I often, a lot of times my prayers are real short. I'll be walking back from the barn or something and just be overwhelmed with how pretty things are and how sweet things are, and I'll just say, thank you, God.
And you
that'll
should
be
be
my
able to do
prayer.
that. That's your relationship with God.
Yeah.
And you should have such a relationship with God that you can approach Him at any time, whisper a prayer or whether you sit down and think things through, whatever it is, the moment you have going on, you should have that kind of closeness with God.
And teach your kids that, yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that, when I was younger, I always got for worship services, that prayer has to be long. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that. That's something I started to figure out more lately, is that you don't have to talk to God for 5 minutes every single time you stop to pray. You just pray about what you need to pray about, and that's all you need to do. It doesn't have to be a overdrawn, long, drawn-out process.
And an important part of that, and you're exactly right, brother, an important part of what I think Francis is trying to communicate, at least this is the way I take it, is that you mean it. Whether it's 5 minutes or whether it's 5 seconds, you mean it. It's not just something you're saying. I want to skip, I've got 5 more pages, but I want to skip to one particular story in the lesson because I heard the first bell. That really is an amazing story. And I want to get your reaction to it. When we played golf last Sunday, or Sunday was it Sunday? With Caleb and John, and Caleb mentioned this story to me. And it's in the chapter. There's a story in the chapter where Francis' daughter makes an F on a test. And she comes home, and Francis can see that she's hurt, that she's disappointed, and she's a little bit afraid that she's fixing to tell her dad that she made an F on a test. And man, hush. And she don't want to tell him. And the reason, because she's afraid. And so she tells him that she made an F on the test. And Francis' reaction to the F was, he took her to dinner, he took her to a movie, and he bought her ice cream. Because she made the F on the test. And he said the reason why he did that is he wanted to teach her about God's grace. And he didn't want to give her what she earned or what she deserved. He wanted to give her something good instead. And he said it was an opportunity because he knew what was going to happen when she went back to school the next day. All the kids were going to be going with a little bit of anticipation and a little bit of joy probably, wanting to hear the car crash that happened when you go to watch NASCAR. You want to see the car crash. They wanted to get home and they wanted to hear what Dad did to you. Boy, it's going to be great. And so her story was, this is what my dad did. And what he taught her, his daughter, was, this is what God does. That He doesn't give you what you've earned or what you deserve. He gives you salvation. He gives you Jesus Christ instead. And he wanted her daughter, his daughter, to do the same thing when she went to school. What's your response to that? How many of you have done that? I never did.
We didn't take ours out to dinner, and it didn't happen frequently that they had bad grades. But we sat down and talked with them, and we told them, if that is the absolute best you can do, we're okay with that. But you need to decide whether or not you could have done better. Could you have studied more? Could you have paid closer attention? We never really got bent out of shape and beat them over the head about a grade that didn't please us. We tried to teach them, and we've told them thousands upon thousands of times, I hope I don't get what I deserve when God judges me. I want grace, and I want mercy.
But the, part of the story is that the daughter, it wasn't because that was the best she had done. She had to study.
Well,
And she knew it, and he
when
knew
it
it.
comes to disciplining my kids, that's all right sometime with me, Very, I try to listen to other people that see their kids and how they behave, and then take ideas from them and try to put it into my family. And that's like, I do that sometimes when the kids will get in trouble. I'll give them grace and let them get out, but very rarely.
Yeah.
And I probably should a little more, but it's like when, a while ago, see, Dana's got kids in a different stage than I have kids, so I want to listen to what she has to say. I heard her try to start talking, and then I was like, whoa, wait, because I want to hear what other people's got to say, that I see how their kids are doing, and so.
My first reaction to that story is, that is crazy. Because what you're teaching them is to be lazy. What you're teaching them is that failure is okay. But then I read, what shall we say then? Shall we continue? Shall we go on sinning that grace may increase? By no means. That's what Paul was hearing when he was preaching in Romans. People were saying, you're teaching that it's okay, that if you keep on sinning, God's just going to keep on forgiving you. And that's crazy. That teaches people that sinning's okay. And Paul says, no, it's not what I'm saying. And that's not what, I never did that, and I'd be afraid to do that, and I'm not advocating that, but I think it's a really powerful point to teach kids that grace, God, how do you teach God's grace? That's one way. Yes.
I think it was, I guess, more appropriate in that situation because clearly the daughter was upset and distraught about her actions. If she were unrepentant about getting that F, then it's God has grace for us, but if we're not repentant and we don't accept that grace, then He's going to give us what we deserve.
Yeah.
So I think that it was a good idea because she was clearly upset about having done that bad, and she felt bad about it and probably wouldn't do that again.
Yeah. Okay, good point. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I think similar to God as a parent, we could beat our kids into submission and have them follow us out of fear, or like we should follow God. Hopefully this will be a little more mature. It's more out of love. Not that we don't fear Him. And so I think it depends on the context, and I don't think He would do that every time, hopefully.
Yeah.
But I definitely think there's times when we have to step back and say, I've been late on something at work, or and I wish on a little grace. And sometimes I found the most unforgiving people are the ones who ask to be forgiven the most.
Thank you. There's a whole lot in this chapter to talk about. I'm sorry.
I think probably a better way to approach it would be to stress to your children that we're supposed to do everything to the best of our ability, and that we will fail sometimes. But as long as, like what he was saying, is if you're doing your best, and that's what we expect of you, because that's what God expects. And sometimes our best isn't so hot, but it's our best.
Yeah. Very good. Like I say, a whole lot in this chapter to talk about. We only touched the surface, and then maybe Paul can set us all right next week. So let's pray together real quick before we go. Father God, we're grateful for the blessing of Jesus Christ. And we're so grateful for grace. We're so thankful that you gave us Jesus instead of what we deserve. Father God, I ask that we will continue to parent our children and point them to you with everything. To openly admit and confess that we don't know everything, but that you do. And we thank you so much for Jesus, and we pray in his name. Thank you.